So I'd like to welcome Ian McCarthy today. He's a special guest for Crude Fitness in this interview series I'm starting. So Ian is quickly growing a pretty large following in the fitness industry, and it's quite clear from his work via no bullshit bodybuilding and lifting for life that he's not out to monetize himself, but rather he's dedicated in providing scientifically validated fitness and nutrition advice. So his mantra kind of fits snugly with my own sentiments in regards to the training without gimmicks kind of mindset. So thanks, Ian, and welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you.
Okay, so Ian, give us a bit of an overview. For those who don't know much about you, can you give us a rundown on how you started and are making a name for yourself in the fitness industry?
Sure. I actually started a channel before the channel for which everyone knows me, and that was almost exactly 2 years ago. I had a training log on bodybuilding.com, and I filmed a few training videos for that. And that's where I started with the informative videos. Is the very first YouTube video I ever made was one of my back workouts and describing in great detail why I did what I did on each exercise. And I got what I thought was at the time a huge response, about 500 views or something like that. Mm-hmm. I thought that was incredible. So I made a few more, but at some point thought, okay, I'm putting quite a lot of time into this and only getting, with consistency, perhaps 100 or 200 views. So I actually deleted the channel. But fairly soon after that, decided to make another one, and that was the Lifting for Life channel. And it did take some time to gain traction, but something that is perhaps not unique to my channel, but fairly rare to see, is that I don't like the word fans, supporters or subscribers, whatever word you would prefer, have always been particularly supportive, whereas subscribers to some number of channels may not consider themselves part of a movement. The members of NBB, we jokingly call them NBBers, mm-hmm. Many of them consider themselves part of a broad pushback against pseudoscience in the industry. So while I've always had and still have many less subscribers than some of these larger channels, they're hopefully, I think so, they appear to be much more dedicated to what it is we're doing.
Yeah. So
I've made a name for myself as an institutional hater, a really good hater of people that I think are worth hating. Not just people, but also objects, entities, things. So
sure.
Pseudoscience itself is something worth hating. Misinformation, mistruth. Mm-hmm. And then there's additional contempt for those that gleefully spread this feces all over the place.
Yeah. So you're saying you started with the channel, right? That you deleted and then started up Lifting for Life. And did that go into no bullshit bodybuilding from there, or was it a separate entity?
Well, no bullshit bodybuilding and Lifting for Life is the same entity, in fact.
Same entity. Okay.
You could consider them brand names. Yeah. No Bullshit Bodybuilding is the name of the Facebook page, and Lifting for Life is the name of the YouTube. My channel. When Lifting for Life came to me, I thought this is really good, mm-hmm. Very catchy, and it also gets straight to the point. And then No Bullshit Bodybuilding also gets straight to the point in a slightly different way, in a slightly less politically correct way. So I don't want to dump either.
That kind of leads me into the second question here. What motivates you to do what you're currently doing within this fitness community that you're involved in? Number one, biggest motivator.
As I said, I have this reputation of being an institutional hater. Hatred would be probably an overstatement. It would be a waste of energy to hate some of these people. It's more so contempt, very, very strong distaste and dislike, and but again, hatred would be something I reserve for people that perhaps have directly negatively affected me personally, if you see the distinction there.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's interesting in that people that dislike me often construe this as being a bad thing, that Ian is just angry and he's a bad person for being motivated in this way. But that's who I am. That's how I've been my entire life. I've always been motivated by contempt for incompetence, ignorance, dishonesty, and all of these things. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
A feeling that there have been moments where I've stopped and said, okay, maybe really I'm putting too much energy in this for how much I'm getting from it. And do I really want to spend my time having to put up with the sort of pathological ignorance? There's a distinction, of course, between someone who's ignorant but willing to learn, and someone that is ignorant and unwilling to learn and is convinced that they know everything that they need to know already.
Yeah.
That's where that is the point at which ignorance becomes pathological.
Yep.
Maybe this isn't my game. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And then it hits me, well, if I did that, all the people that hate me would feel vindicated. So I don't want them to gain an inch. So we can't take the pressure off, in other words. And it's not just about me either. It's as I've said, it's some kind of a movement.
Yeah.
It's really a generational difference is what you see. Is the overwhelming majority of those that support me. Again, it's not about me, but members of NBB and subscribers on my channel are young people. Yeah. And this is the argument you always see. You see the 30-plus-year-old guys on the one side, and then the younger generation pushing back against that. And you'll see that in every generation on any given topic. So, yes.
Sure.
I forget now what the question was.
It was how long did you take to get noticed? But you did answer that. So.
How long did I take to get noticed? I got noticed immediately, but in terms of actually gaining any traction, because given that I'm repeating for the third time now this concept of the institutional hater. Everyone just knows Ian McCarthy as that asshole who just hates everyone. And gosh, why doesn't he just go hang himself and stop it, making things hard for us? So everyone knows who I am. Yeah. But in terms of actually getting a substantive base of support, it's still relatively recent. I'm now in the position that the Facebook page has something like 15,000 likes, and I have over 14,000 subscribers on YouTube. So I'm still very much in the minority. Yeah. I find all the time that my views are minority views, which is fine. That's true with regard to my politics and views like this as well. And I would feel slightly uncomfortable if everyone agreed with me. But it is nice to have some sort of support in that it's not just me having to argue all these points with all these people all the time.
Yeah, I mean, especially it's hard to see who's trolling and who's genuinely, debating any given topic that you might be talking about.
Yes, and I only have so much time and so much energy, and if it's just Ian McCarthy versus 100,000 trolls, then turns me off fairly briskly. Whereas you find now on NBB that there are perhaps a dozen or so veteran members, many of which, I'll state flatly, actually know more about at least certain aspects of bodybuilding than I do. It's so refreshing to have that. Whereas when I started, it was just me. And I've been fortunate to have a few people. LJ is one of the leaders, and a gentleman named Paul Mura. I've had a few people assist consistently, but it's getting better and better.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just take a step back for a second. I want to get a bit more in depth on your background. How long have you been studying science and more so physiology and body systems, and what do you feel are its biggest strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I've had some interest in it since roughly this time, 2007, I think. when I started reading Men's Health magazine in the UK.
Like all of us, right?
So you can see that I started off with the highest quality information.
Yeah.
And fairly soon after that is when I became anorexic. So it may not have been the best influence at the time. But then when I was recovering from anorexia, it wasn't just a question of being interested in something in the way that I am interested in philosophy. It was an imperative that I really learn about these questions because I was in a position of being near death. So it's easy to just eat a lot of food as a response to anorexia, a way of recovering from it. But I said, okay, I don't just want to become some fat ass now. I want to gain the weight back in a healthy way. And ultimately, I was, whatever I was, 14 or 15 at the time. And the thought was, okay, I want to grow into a healthy adult now. And because there is this unfortunate tendency of people, those that do genuinely recover from anorexia, going from anorexic to incredibly out of shape. I've seen it repeatedly. Seen it with friends of mine. And that's not what I wanted to do. So again, it was an imperative. It wasn't just something that I did for fun so that I could masturbate my intellect. So, and what was the second part of the question?
Second part was, what do you feel?
In other words, excuse me, to actually answer your question, 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, 5 or 6 years.
Increasingly seriously.
And what do you feel are its biggest strengths and weaknesses?
What is it?
The studying of physiology and body systems as a whole. Like, do you find that it's a holistic kind of opinion that is fact, or do you find there's a lot of holes in it? What's your view on that?
Probably lack of really good research that's relevant to trained individuals. So frequently you'll go through the literature and you'll find a study. I mean, you'll glance at the abstract and it looks lovely, and then you realize that it was done on diabetic people.
Yeah.
And then you face palm and move on to the next one. But that happens all the time, or it's done on untrained people, not relevant. Or research that is relevant is of mediocre quality.
Yeah.
Of course, the question is, who wants to put a large amount of money into research specifically for bodybuilders?
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of money that various entities are willing to put into research relating to, again, diabetes, because there's such a big market of diabetics.
Yeah.
Whereas the bodybuilding population is tiny. So. And what this means is that we are left with the supplement companies funding the research, which is not always a bad thing. It's just dependent on the honesty of the company, which you know how that is.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you stay up to date and relevant with the latest research that's going on out there? What are your methods?
Well, those that aren't quote-unquote in the know seem to think that there is some secret newsletter that is sent to all of the individuals with doctorates, that they get the special information that the layman doesn't have access to, or to which the layman does not have access. But the reality is, someone like Alan Aragon is going to get his information through PubMed just like me. So Google Scholar actually compiles all of the various databases. So I like that rather more than PubMed.
Yeah.
And whatever the interest may be, or whatever the question may be, or the topic may be, part of it is you need to know how to phrase your searches so that you actually get relevant research. So if you go into PubMed and type in how much protein do you need to eat per day, you're perhaps not going to find the relevant research. Whereas evaluation of protein intake in resistance-trained athletes or something would be much closer.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what it is. there is difficulty in that a lot of published research has to be paid for, although universities usually have access to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and reading through research, as dull as that can be, and one of the big mistakes is the so-called PubMed ninjas that just read through abstracts, or they'll go to an abstract, read the title, and read the last 2 lines.
Conclusion.
They read nothing of the methodology. There may be some glaringly obvious error in the methodology that makes it the research totally irrelevant, but they don't notice that because they don't care. So, again, I forget the question. The question was, where do I get this information?
No, how do you stay up to date and relevant? So you've answered that.
I mean, earlier today, before I went to the gym, I spent half an hour reading through, really not thoroughly going through, but I'll finish it tonight, research demonstrating that the GLUT4 pathway, I don't know if it's supposed to be pronounced GLUT4 or GLUT4, it's strictly speaking not insulin dependent. It's widely understood as the insulin dependent nutrient transport pathway, glucose transport pathway, but it's been shown now that contraction of skeletal muscle has similar effects. And if you stop and think about this for a second, that says something about, it might have some application to post-workout nutrition. So, and then any given day there's something I'm reading. So there you go.
Yep. So you briefly mentioned Alan Aragon just a moment ago. So I guess that kind of leads me to this question. What are some of the other writers and fitness leaders that have inspired you since you began?
It's mostly Alan. I like Eric Helms as well. But to be perfectly honest, it might be an overstatement to say that Eric has inspired me. Eric and Alan both share the facts that they're very well educated. Although I have seen people say that having a master's degree in nutrition doesn't really count for anything. You're always going to have people that are going to say that.
Yeah.
The same people that say that Lane Norton's PhD doesn't count because he went to a shitty school, when in reality the school he went to is perhaps the second or third best school in the entire United States in his field of study. But again, Eric and Alan, well-educated, intelligent guys, very honest, nice guys, you know, not like me.
I've seen your round tables, and they've always been informative. So
so there is that.
Yeah. So just to
other than that, it's something that is, again, not unique about me, but I don't really keep track of personalities. Some of the names that you listed off before we started recording, I'm assuming because you mentioned these names that these are influential people in the industry. Never heard of most of them except for perhaps one or two. Because, as I said in the discussion or the debate that I had with Mr. Dave Pulcinella, I try to evaluate evidence rather than picking personalities that seem to be nice and have, you know, nice eyes and attractive haircuts. So I'm going to listen to everything they say. And I encourage everyone to think in that way, rather than just accepting what Lyle McDonald says because everyone accepts what Lyle McDonald has said. Lyle, for example, said that he believes that carbohydrates the consumption of protein and carbohydrates is post-workout is superior to the consumption of only protein post-workout. And in fact, I pointed out that even based on his own logic, that's not correct. There is no need for carbohydrates post-workout. If you're trying to elevate insulin and provide amino acids for protein synthesis, protein can do both of those things. And then when I pointed that out, I had a number of people say, but Ian, this is Lyle McDonald. How can you question Lyle McDonald? No, we don't want people thinking like this. Same with me. I don't want people that claim to support me thinking in that way either. Well, Ian McCarthy says it. Well, so what? Who gives a shit? What does the evidence say? So that's why I can't give you a laundry list of people that inspire me in the industry. Most of the people that I very, very strongly respect have nothing whatsoever to do with bodybuilding.
Right.
We may get to that later.
Sure. So, just to change it up a bit, I'm just going to switch over to some more, I guess, current affair type of questions.
Sure.
So now, as far as I can surmise, there are two definitions of Broscience, right? This is definition
Right.
number one: someone who takes scientific research on board, but then adjusts methodology to suit their own needs, aka someone like Scooby, who claims to be that, for example. Or number two, the more common example, which ultimately sounds illogical anyways to me, Broscience being a predominant brand of reasoning in bodybuilding circles where the anecdotal reports of jacked guys are considered more credible than scientific research. So I guess in light of those two kind of definitions, why are you so against Broscience in terms of the first definition that I gave you?
Well, because the first, excuse me, I should stop smoking. The first definition isn't what I would consider Broscience. I don't see anything unscientific about that view.
Right.
For example, let's take the question of protein needs in resistance-trained athletes. We have a growing body of research. A lot of it, going back to a previous point, is unfortunately mediocre, has limited actual application. There's nothing unscientific about starting with that research and then playing with protein numbers over time, because of course there is an element of individual variation in how the body's going to respond to it. For example, something I don't see talked about in the research, and this may just be because I probably don't stay as up to date on it as someone like Eric, given that protein is what he does, or someone like Lane, protein is what he does. I've not seen discussed much in the research the fact that amino acid sensitivity tends to decrease with age, meaning that young people and insulin sensitivity tends to decrease with age, which means that young people are likely going to be able to get away with more carbs and less protein. So a guy that's 20 versus a guy that's 50, more protein, less carbs for the older person. There's nothing unscientific about anything I've just said. Broscience to me is the second definition you've given of someone who says, okay, you have all this research demonstrating that meal frequency has no effect on basal metabolism, but I don't care because whatever it may be, I eat more meals per day and I just feel like my metabolism is burning faster. I sweat more when I do that. I've actually had people give me these sort of pitiful attempts at arguments. That to me is Broscience.
Okay.
The idea of using the research we have as a springboard and going from there is not at all unscientific.
Great. Yeah, I think for me it's been a bit of, I guess, cloudy. It's been a cloudy issue with a lot of people I've spoken to. You know, Broscience is different.
If
to
someone
everyone
says, I'm sorry to interrupt, I'm always accused of doing that too much, probably for good reason. If someone only goes by what the research says, there's just huge chunks of what we do in practice about which the research says little or nothing. So if someone says every single thing I do in practice is going to be based off of some research, well, they're not going to get very far, I don't think.
Yeah.
So, and this is I'm accused constantly of holding to some sort of self-refuting scientism type view.
Yeah.
As I've just described, which is just a complete fiction, frankly. And I think the people that say this to me know that they're lying, but they do it to cheapen the discourse. Or maybe they're just that stupid. Who knows? But no, that's just not correct.
Yeah.
Broscience to me is something, as I said repeatedly in my debate with Dave, is that, again, Broscience is something that we know is false.
Yeah.
Someone says you have to have pure dextrose within 30 minutes of training to restore glycogen because your glycogen is depleted.
Yeah.
We have actually very good research done on actual trained bodybuilders. I believe this was done at the University of New Mexico, but I'd have to look at the research again. They actually took a group of trained bodybuilders, they put them through a 20 set leg workout, every single set to failure, and their glycogen was only depleted by 25 to 30% within their quadriceps. So in other words, the argument that, okay, you do 20 or 30 sets, which is quite high volume, certainly if you do less than that, and then, well, your glycogen is depleted now, so you need these carbs. That's pure bullshit. We know that that is wrong.
Yeah.
That's Broscience.
That was something I learned back in 2003 was that sentiment.
Yes, the glycogen, it's just one of the most blatantly false claims. And you know exactly why people continue to say it. They always have a product to sell you. Yeah. You need fast digesting carbohydrate, 34 seconds after training, or limbs will begin to fall off. Yeah. Here is the product you need. This precise product that I can sell you for $340 a bottle, and it has a nice wrapper, and it's just nonsense.
And for best gains, must be taken 8 times a day.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, in your mind, what are some of the best examples of poor fitness advice that both men and women get from mags, blogs, personal trainers, and fitness pros? What would be key bad examples?
Almost everything that relates to nutrition. Ab initio, just right from the beginning. Protein recommendations are almost always too high. Yep, you always hear 1 to 1.5 grams per pound. That's almost certainly excessive. And what's amazing is that's given as a
minimum dose. Right?
Yes, it's given as a moderate recommendation. Yeah. 1 to 1.5 grams. That's good for most people, but you might need more. It's amazing.
Because we're all Jay Cutler and we need that.
Yes. And what's amazing is Jay Cutler actually eats a lot less protein than people think. But anyway, almost anything concerning meal frequency is complete nonsense. Claims about effects on basal metabolism, the thermic effect of food. I've beaten this into the ground. I hope people are getting bored of me talking about it, frankly, because I am. Yeah. The arguments that you need to consume 30 or 40 grams of protein every 2 hours because you need a constant flow of amino acids in your blood. I mean, come on. It's laughable, really. I'm amazed that anyone believes anything like this. Yeah. Claims that, I'm trying to think, that you have to completely cut carbs out of your diet when you're cutting because carbohydrates stimulate insulin, and if insulin is stimulated, you can't lose fat. Of course, protein is insulinogenic, but they don't know that because they never studied the subject. Or claims about peri-workout nutrition, so pre, during, and post-workout nutrition are always the waters are always muddied by the supplement companies, essentially. So you always have someone wanting to sell you a pre-workout product with waxy cornstarch and intra-workout, whatever it may be, and then post-workout, these shakes, and you have to have a shake because the steak won't get to your muscles fast enough. The good old lipid hypothesis, the claim that every imaginable disease is the result of consuming dietary fat. On the other hand, you have people saying every imaginable disease is the result of consuming gluten. Again, do they have any evidence for this claim? Of course not, but they don't base their views on evidence. So again, nutrition, there's lots of nonsense within the training realm also, but it certainly doesn't annoy me to the same degree. Because even the bro scientists, people that don't pay attention to the research and they don't really study the subjects, they'll realize, if you want to get bigger legs, you should do squats and things like this. Yeah. You can get a lot wrong with training and still get probably most of it right. Yeah. Although within training, you still have we're still fighting the myth about training frequency. You still have people saying deep squats will hurt your knees. You still have people advocating pre-exhaust. So maybe everything I just said is actually incorrect, and I haven't spent enough time evaluating all of the nonsensical claims made within the training realm. But nutrition is more my interest, so that's so I'm spend more time pissed off at that.
For sure. So speaking of pissed off, you know, when you post videos quite often on intermittent fasting, starvation mode, etc. How do you, you know, it's quite polarizing to a lot of people and some of your views. How do you deal with and handle the criticism that floods your, you know, Facebook and YouTube feeds? Do you find it kind of a personal nick in the head, or is it more of a, this is my professional opinion, I don't really care what you say? You know, how do you deal with that?
Well, I can't really care about what people say. If I did, I just flat out would have killed myself by now. Mm-hmm. Given the really amazing degree to which people are willing to fabricate the most absurd lies about me. As Noam Chomsky said, he many years ago defended a Holocaust denier, a gentleman in France who essentially claimed that the entirety of the Holocaust was fabricated. And Noam Chomsky said, obviously this gentleman's claims are complete fiction, but we should allow him to speak because that's the whole point of free speech. Yeah. Hate speech is free speech, and why would we censor someone that is denying the Holocaust, given that the Nazis loved censorship? Yeah. And Noam Chomsky was painted as a Holocaust denier himself, because he said that a Holocaust denier has the right to deny the Holocaust. And a very good point Chomsky made was that, what does one say to that? If someone says to you, you're a racist, you can't say, no, I'm not a racist. It does nothing. The first thing that people think is, he must be a racist. He's denying being a racist. Well, that's because he is a racist. And so the slanderer always has the upper hand. So the sort of accusations I see about me, I can't say anything to them. It's just the people that want to believe these things about me will, and those that don't won't. So I just have to leave it as it is. I trolling on my YouTube channel, I essentially have no interaction with them. I just immediately remove the comments and block these people, and frankly, I have neither the time, and even if I had the time, I would have no interest in interacting with them. And then on the Facebook page, if a debate is respectful, it's fine. Yeah. And even if it's mildly disrespectful, as long as it's not telling people that, someone said this to Mike Pulcinella a few days ago, they said that they hope that his entire family dies in front of him and that he can do nothing to save them. Wow. I feel embarrassed knowing that there is even someone on the planet that thinks like that. But again, there's some fairly lengthy debates on the NBB Facebook page, and there are people that will come on and make comments toward me or other NBB members. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's everyone, I can be cheeky, so we let them get away with it to a certain degree. But there's an important point to be made, is that I like debate. I spend a lot of time in my personal life debating, usually not relating to bodybuilding, things like religion and politics. But there's a huge difference between the dialectic, so two or more people discussing a topic and hopefully getting closer to the truth, hopefully one person being right. And there's a huge difference between that and simply vulgar nonsense. Mm-hmm. And that's what you get on the internet, is essentially vulgar nonsense. Sure. If someone has legitimate arguments for their position, they don't need to call you a glorious winged ginger faggot or whatever it may be. Yeah. It's just not necessary. It doesn't add anything to their argument. So someone only asserts this if they have nothing to say. Yeah. So there may have been a time when it would have bothered me, but now some of the insults are laughable. Literally, they make me laugh. Yeah. There's some amount of thought goes into these insults that people manage to come up with. And then I occasionally do these hate mail videos. So, but point is, I don't, for the most part, I don't bother interacting with the people at all. It would be giving them too much credit. So,
yeah. So, you know, I noticed in the past you've often gone on, I guess, the likes of, I don't want to name names, but Vince Del Monte and the Hodge twins and all that, and commented on their things. And
Sure.
The reason I'm mentioning those is that, for myself, I've built up my own online business with friends and fitness leaders that I converse with. And, I lean on them for advice, training, nutrition, etc., and article posting and inspiration in that regard. But do you worry at all that you're making enemies to the point where it could be detrimental to your future in any way in the industry?
Well, the damage has already been done, obviously. So, no, it's I'm not in the industry to make friends, and I think it's very important that we not fall to groupthink. Essentially, become an industry where everyone just sucks each other off, and nothing ever really gets done. So there always needs to be someone willing to say, okay, I'm just going to stand for what I think is true, as opposed to making friends or whatever it may be. So I've said some very brutal and at times unkind things about, I could give you a laundry list of people in the industry. Very little of it do I regret or would I repudiate or take back, because I just flat out think that it's the truth. The fact of the matter is, there's plenty of time to be a nice guy when I'm dead. I'm obviously not. No, I'm not. I'm not being facetious or flippant. I'm being serious. I have a fairly limited time to say what I really think about these topics. So the people that are going to say, well, Ian's just whatever it is, it's become such a cliche now. Ian is just arrogant, insolent little boy that can't lift weights and whatever it may be. Well, if I lose those people, I don't care. Those aren't the kind of people that I particularly am interested in the first place. I'm interested in I'm not the kind of person who reads Lyle McDonald's articles and then sees some of his Facebook posts and goes, oh, well, he's an asshole, so I'm going to stop reading his articles. Just get over it. It's
just how he is. Yeah.
It's extremely nauseating, actually, the amazing, because what this really is, this idea of, you hear it all the time, we're all in this together, let people do their own thing, to each his own, and all this. It's at the core of its being, this is extraordinary dishonesty, a fantastic unwillingness for people to say what they really think in public. They'll say it behind the scenes. I'm amazed by the kind of shit-talking I've seen behind the scenes between these people, the kind of things that you'll have some fitness figures that seem to be best friends, and as soon as they're not on camera, they'll talk about how much they hate them, but when they're on camera, they'll talk about how great they are because they know it's good for business. That is extraordinarily disgusting, in my view. So I'd rather just come out and say it. And the fact of the matter is, if I didn't live in the U.S. and wasn't so liable to getting sued so easily, I would be more direct than I am, if you can imagine that. But I have to dance around liability all the time. So I feel like every industry, every group needs someone like that. An example would be, I consider myself some kind of liberal, but I find recently I spend most of my time attacking the Democratic Party, a party which I don't consider myself a Democrat, but I've traditionally been closer to that than a Republican. But what really pisses me off is the stupidity that I see among people that are close to me politically. Same with those people that share my beliefs about religion. If I see what I think is intellectual laziness or whatever it may be among those people that quote unquote are on my side and should be my friends, I'm rather more annoyed by that than because everyone can make jokes about those on the other side, but someone has to stir it up among the friends.
Sure.
So otherwise, again, it would simply decay into everyone agreeing about everything all the time and no progress being made in any direction. And yes, it's damaging to my reputation among certain groups of people, and also among other groups of people, admittedly a smaller number of people, it's useful. They recognize what it is I stand for, and they appreciate it. And what was I? Oh, there's been a huge shift, a subtle shift in a way. It's been a very gradual shift, so many people haven't noticed it. But if you go back 2 years or something and watch the videos put up by so many of these YouTube fitness community people, the kind of change. Look at the kind of information put up by Nick Wright or J.R. Barthel or the Hodge twins. Just a gigantic shift, almost a complete 180 from eat every 2 hours, eat clean, time your creatine and so forth, right to the views that I've been endorsing all along. Now, I'm not going to say, well, it's just because of me. That would be much too easy. But I would like to think that I've been a large part of it. Mm-hmm. And many of them would probably recognize that. Some of them wouldn't, just because they hate my guts. And they don't want to admit that I've ever been right with regard to anything. But a guy like Nick was one of Nick Wright was one of the first people I challenged on some of the things he said. And he and I are now in some sense friends. We've not met in real life yet, but we text occasionally, and if he has questions about whatever it may be, how alcohol is metabolized or whatever it may be, he'll ask me. I'm kind of his go-to guy for that. So there's some people, not many, but some that are open-minded and willing to do that.
Sure.
But anyway, I'm boring you to tears at this point, so
it's all good. All good.
Banging on a bit.
Before we move on to more science-related stuff, I just want to ask you one final thing. I do a lot of, I guess, interviews with fitness pros and and the like.
Sure.
Partly due to because I think they're inspiring, but I'm led to believe that you're not of that view. So I guess, why do you feel that fitness pros are a poor choice for the common fitness enthusiast to aspire to?
I'm curious as to what you mean by fitness pro. Would Alan Aragon be a fitness pro, or do you mean I
mean like models, IFBB, that kind of pro? Someone that's got their pro card.
Yeah, they can be inspiring, motivating in the sense that their physiques, something to aspire to. Now, I don't exactly aspire to look like Jay Cutler. In fact, I'll ramble on this point a bit as well. If you talk to IFBB pros, most of them will tell you how uncomfortable it is to be as large as they are. Yeah. What was I about to say? Uncomfortable to be how... I don't know. That sentence wasn't going anywhere. But for women, female figure pros, for example, seem to be a pretty good standard. And for men, natural pros.
Natural pros.
Of Matt Ogus, I'm imagining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've seen many people say that they would really, really like to look like him. So they can be inspiring in that way. Their training videos can be motivating. Because, of course, not many people want to watch someone my size train. I don't think anyone watches the few training videos I have because, Ian McCarthy has a great physique. Maybe I can get some technique from him to which I've not been exposed before. Whereas a Jay Cutler video, it doesn't matter how much or how little he may know about I was going to say biomechanics, although biochemistry as well. But it's just he has huge shoulders, and it's fun to watch him train shoulders, or it can be. Training videos can be boring as well. But in the sense of, do I find them to be, I don't like this term or this concept, but role models. Do I really, really want to be like some top IFBB pro? No. Frankly, doesn't do anything for me. But that's obviously me. Perhaps I'm in a minority on this point.
Sure. All right. Let's talk a little bit more about science training and nutrition now. Do variances in published studies sway your bias towards human biology being one of flexibility, rather than a one kind of size fits all scenario, or do you feel that science should be used as rigid fact and not only just as a starting point?
I'm not quite sure what to make of that question.
I guess I'm saying that, you know, based on someone's ancestry, demographic, age, etc., do you find there's a bigger sway amongst a trained athlete, or do you find that you can kind of holistically group most people under the umbrella of fact, of science?
A few points to make there. I'll start by saying that it's not correct. You obviously didn't say this, but it is often said that science deals in proofs. This supplement is scientifically proven to burn fat or whatever. As soon as someone says that, they've demonstrated that they don't know anything about science. They just they haven't spent 5 minutes studying the scientific method. So, proofs are a mathematical concept. Now, the word proof has now been bastardized. People say, okay, well, we can have a historical proof, which means reasonable certainty that someone existed. This is mildly euphemistic or questionable use of the language. So proof, in terms of talking about certainties, is, again, should be left to mathematics, whereas with science we need to be talking about evidence. Mm-hmm. Of course, there can be strength of evidence. If you look at the amount of evidence in favor of Darwinian theory, you have a huge amount in favor and none against. So that is as much a fact as something possibly can be within science. Now, your question about ancestry and so forth, of course there are differences there. Prime example would be lactose intolerance. Very much more common among those of African descent than those of European descent. Mm-hmm. Gluten intolerance is similarly more common among that group. So if someone says, well, there are no genetic differences, those are just some easy examples.
Yeah.
So if someone, and black men, actually, I should say black people, typically have more fast twitch muscle. You can just see this by looking at someone. Mm-hmm. It's a totally different type of muscle. They have, the tendency to have higher calves and things of this type. Mm-hmm. It's obviously there. But basic physiology, really basic physiology, is not going to vary. Things like, does leucine stimulate mTOR? You're not going to find large groups of people where isoleucine does it instead of leucine, or some non-essential amino acid does that. So the really basic points, like what happens after you lift weights, protein synthesis and protein breakdown are elevated. You're not going to find groups of people where after they resistance train, protein breakdown is decreased. Mm-hmm. So on those core points, which are the points about which we spend a lot of the time debating, there isn't going to be some variance there.
Right.
It's like saying in some groups of people they reproduce sexually, and in other groups of people they have, what is the term for non-sexual...
Immaculate conception?
Well, no, that's immaculate conception is a complete fiction. The Catholic Church actually added that in. There was nothing in the original text about that, but that concept, the concept of the virgin birth, which happens in some species, it's never been seen in humans. It's not like, okay, Caucasian people reproduce sexually, but if you're of African descent, you might spontaneously get pregnant.
Yeah.
That's not something that is going to be demonstrated to be false somewhere down the road.
Sure.
So yes, there are going to be variances in the details, but the big questions like, do you need to consume fatty acids to live? Okay. You're not going to have groups of people that don't need to consume fat. I can go on about this for a while. But.
I mean, this kind of leads me into the next question, which is, I guess, trying to put this to rest a little bit with the recent debate you had with Dave Pulcinella. So,
yes.
Recently he stated that bio-individuality plays a
Yes.
huge part in the results he gets his clients. Can you kind of elaborate on why you feel this stance is entirely wrong?
Well, I don't think it's entirely wrong. I responded with some contempt to the use of the word because I think it's been bastardized by pseudo-intellectual buffoons who want to sell you bullshit programs or books or leaflets or whatever it may be. They want you to join their cult of blood type dieters or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
So bio-individuality, the concept is fine, but when I hear the word, I always cringe. And trust me on this point. Actually, don't trust me. Go to Google, type in bio-individuality, and see what the first 10 hits are. You're probably going to get, and I suppose I have to note for liability purposes, I'm not talking about any specific company or group. I'm guessing first 10 hits are going to be supplement companies, blood type, dieting, fanatics, things like this. So that's why I don't like the word. But again, the idea that there are individual variances in genetics that are going to affect everything, that's valid. What I would question is the ability for a personal trainer to have access to know about someone's genetic makeup. There's an unavoidable epistemological problem there in that I just don't know how they will be able to find that out. We now have the amazing technology, of course, to sequence the entire genome of a person. And we can literally identify genes. Some genes affect how deeply someone inhales cigarettes, for example. And so if someone has a variant of that gene, they inhale more deeply and are more likely to get lung cancer if they smoke.
Right.
There are some people who have a gene, a variant of a gene that allows them to get less sleep and function just as well. Mm-hmm. There are some people that, for some reason that we've not quite understood yet, they are almost total non-responders to resistance training. I mean, think about that for a second. They just, not totally, but almost don't respond to resistance training, which would explain people who theoretically train correctly and eat correctly and all this and make almost no progress. I mean, this gives us a lot of information and explains a lot of things that we might notice in practice but can't explain. So again, concept is fine, don't like the word for the reasons I described, and I would question the ability for a personal trainer to discover many of these things. Suppose if it's a question of how much protein someone can consume, given enough time and enough trial and error, they can get pretty close. Yeah. But yeah, I've made my point there. I think. Just
a question about, I guess, nutrient timing and performance enhancing drugs.
Sure.
Do you believe that nutrient timing, I guess, such as intermittent fasting or 6 to 8 meals per day, varies in their influence depending upon whether PEDs are involved?
Depends what kind of drugs these people are using. Basic anabolics increase energy needs, improve nutrient partitioning, things like this. But someone could theoretically still do something like intermittent fasting. Now, if you're dealing with insulin would be the prime example of something where you can't inject a ton of insulin and then not eat carbs for 8 hours unless you're not particularly intent on living much longer. So that's where nutrient timing does come into play. Everyone talks about the kind of explosion in size within the IFBB ranks from sort of really 1990 to about 93. And everyone has their own explanation for this. The correct explanation is insulin. I've talked to some people that know about this, and of course I'm not going to name them, but I'm trying to think how much of this I can actually say. But the difference between the Lee Haney generation and the Dorian Yates generation is basically insulin supplementation. So in the Lee Haney era, this is really interesting. This goes against all the Broscience bullshit you hear now about post-workout nutrition. Lee Haney won 8 Mr. Olympias, and he would never eat immediately after training. He would always wait for an hour. The concept being The idea behind this being that not eating for an hour after training would allow for a natural increase in growth hormone production.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or you understand what I've said there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the Lee Haney era. In comes the Dorian Yates era, and suddenly IFBB pros, essentially all of them eat 400, 500 grams of carbs immediately after training in the off season. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Insulin.
Mm-hmm.
So again, in that sense, nutrient timing absolutely does matter. You can't train, inject a huge amount of exogenous insulin into a super physiological range, and then go home and just watch TV and masturbate. It's not going to work. And this is a point that it was a mistake to not mention this in the discussion with Dave. Although, frankly, I wasn't. I suppose in a way I didn't want to bring it up on camera. Mm-hmm. You always have to tiptoe around it for legal reasons and reasons of reputation and all of this. I wasn't there in an attempt to embarrass anyone, so perhaps the point could have been made, I should say, in a general sense, but it does need to be brought up, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So insulin, yes,
yeah.
matters. Otherwise, not so much.
So kind of leads me to this next point. Do you have any thoughts on post-workout windows or timing that you feel a lot of us get wrong on a daily basis, specifically in regards to people that IF, where someone like myself trains fasted and then doesn't eat till, I guess, around lunchtime? Do you feel that's detrimental to gains or better for fat loss? What are your thoughts on that whole scenario?
I'm skeptical of both lines of claims that are made about intermittent fasting. On the one hand, you have advocates of it that say that they lose fat faster. And on the other hand, you have those that say that it's detrimental to muscle gain or causes muscle loss, whatever it may be. I always fall back to the position, which I think is the most, probably the easiest to defend, the most rational, which is that what matters is net fat loss and net muscle protein balance at the end of the day. And something we do know is that if one goes for a lengthy amount of time without food, that the anabolic response will be exaggerated. Makes perfect sense if you have even a vague understanding of evolution and our history on the savannah and so forth. So when people say, okay, if you go too long without eating after training, whatever, what is it? You're going to lose muscle and all these things.
Yeah.
If overall nutrition is intact, I'm, again, very skeptical of that.
Yeah. Now,
we could very easily have research that comes out sometime in the future where we have, again, trained bodybuilders running two distinct protocols. One group, I don't know, trains fasted and then eats immediately, and another group trains fasted and eats 6 hours later. And if one group very clearly gains strength faster, gains muscle faster, whatever it may be, well, that's your answer.
Mm-hmm.
But until then, I think it's quite, well, we essentially have to rely on what we can come up with in terms of an understanding of basic physiology and some kind of hypothesis, and then we have anecdote.
Yeah.
So I think if it was a major problem, we would notice it in practice. But yeah, that's the answer.
Okay. Just to switch over quickly before I get to some reader questions, just to training and your own supplementation, for want of a better word. What training methods do you use most frequently when trying to build mass, which I hear you're currently, that's your goal right now?
Yeah, if you're asking me, I do some kind of a split, but one of the problems I have personally with, well, the main problem, or, well, I should say, I have a few big problems with full body training or upper-lower routines for me personally, in that I like to train every day. It's just that I'm young, I eat a lot. I seem to get away with very little sleep. There's no reason, in other words, for me to not train every day. I'm obviously not going to do a full body every day. I'm obviously not going to do upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, lower until the end of time, sake of recovery, joints, and all of this. So some kind of a split is what ends up making sense.
Yeah.
But a combination of the training every day and a split still means that I manage to train everything roughly every 5th day, which is actually not that far off of what an upper lower might do. So it's not as bad as what the average IFBB Pro does.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not what I generally recommend. Full bodies are appropriate for large numbers of people. An upper lower is probably perfect for essentially everyone at the intermediate stage, which is probably most people.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, this is the kind of thing I've said many, many times, but what I'm doing personally is some kind of a split.
Yeah. So in terms of, I guess, strength and mass building, do you find you change every, I guess, 8 weeks or so, change rep ranges, volume?
No.
You don't need to?
Something I do is I tend to have a rep range that I prefer for every given exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an example, and this is intuitive to most people, I think. I say it to people and they look at me like I have no idea what I'm talking about, but you wouldn't do a 5x5 on lateral raises.
Yeah.
Just who would dream of doing a 5x5 on lateral raises? No, you do 2 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps, something like that.
Yeah.
Really, everyone that does lateral raises does something like that, because a 5x5 would be difficult to maintain form. It would be stressful on both the elbow and the shoulder joint. In fact, when I go too heavy, it starts to hurt my wrist. Whereas with deadlifts, you wouldn't do 4 sets of 12 or something, given that form starts to break down in higher rep ranges. So I tend to find a rep range that I prefer for an exercise and largely stick to that.
Yeah.
So I don't particularly like bench pressing. I may start doing it again now, given that I've really said I'm going all out for strength and mass gains this year. So if I can figure out how to get my form down such that it doesn't annoy my right shoulder as it always has, I'll probably do a lot of 5x5 benching this year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be doing a lot of 3x12 benching, because to me, bench, that's a 5x5 exercise, whereas on high incline dumbbell presses, my elbows hurt if I go too heavy, so I do more like 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
Is this necessarily the way to do it? No. But this is perfect for me because I get a mixture of rep ranges. I'm able to rotate them such that I'm not just doing whatever it may be 5x5, which means my joints would be hurting, having recovery issues.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do this as they'll have a heavy day and a light day.
Yeah.
They'll have the 5x5 days and then the hypertrophy days. Some people will rotate through rep ranges in a whole cycle. They'll do heavy training for 6 weeks, a week or 2 weeks off, and then go into hypertrophy training. Whichever way around people like it.
That's what works for you, right?
I really don't do... I almost never make major changes in my training.
Mm-hmm.
I stick almost always to the same sort of exercises. For back training, I essentially always do medium grip pull downs, dumbbell rows, some kind of a deadlift. Those are always my core back exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always looking for an improvement in form, or maybe using straps less or adding a little bit of weight, whatever it may be. Always some sort of incremental improvement, as opposed to doing something for 6 weeks, dumping it, resetting. And that may become necessary. Well, probably will. Well, maybe not. I know people that are at the advanced level that don't do that. But if I get to the point where what I'm doing now, I'm not making any improvements, consistently not making any improvements, I'll step back and reevaluate. But that's where I am now.
Yeah. So just one final question before I get to the reader ones. I know you're not a huge fan of supplementation at all. Well, I'm not either. But what supplements do you use, if any?
Well, I'm looking here at a tub of whey protein, so I should start by saying that I don't really consider whey protein a supplement. Now, it says dietary supplement because it's produced by supplement companies, that's the way it is, but the fact of the matter is whey protein can be sold as a foodstuff. In fact, Kraft macaroni and cheese, for example, the main ingredient of their quote-quote cheese sauce is whey. Cheap whey concentrate, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But the point is that the whey is fundamentally a powdered protein, no less of a food than powdered milk or something like that. So when people ask me about supplements, I almost never say anything about whey protein, and then they say, what, are you against whey protein or protein powders? No, I just don't think of it as a supplement. So whey protein, supplements for health, so things like multivitamins, they're a so-called, what do people always call them? Just in case, given that even the good ones are fairly inexpensive, they can cover one's bases if there are holes in one's diet. Although the best way to do that actually is to do what I did recently and had a whole blood panel done of micronutrients. They can literally test your B12 and say, okay, there's too much or too little, whatever it may be. And everything was fine. My B12 was a little high, which is very common with bodybuilders. Things like fish oil, a high-quality fish oil, something in a triglyceride form. I use something called Nordic Naturals something. One of the most expensive brands, but it's higher quality fish oil.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what else I would recommend for health. Vitamin D3 at a fairly high dosage, 5,000 to 10,000 IUs. That's about it for health. The research on joint supplements is extremely questionable. The research isn't questionable. Whether or not the supplements are actually useful is questionable. Yeah. Given that they tend to be extremely inexpensive, no harm done, but the research that shows them to be beneficial is largely on the elderly. So there's that. Now, in terms of bodybuilding type supplements, muscle building supplements, of course, creatine monohydrate. And the fact of the matter is, creatine monohydrate is so inexpensive that you can buy almost any brand and be fairly sure that it is creatine monohydrate. Like, they're not going to use creatine monohydrate itself is used as a filler by supplement companies all the time, given how cheap it is.
Yeah.
So the idea that they're going to take out some creatine and put in rice flour is a bit of a fantasy. But if you're worried about it, buy it from Optimum Nutrition or Prima Force or something like that. Beta-alanine. These are the things that you notice. They're inexpensive and there's research behind them. Caffeine pills. An enormous amount of research behind caffeine as an ergogen. Those would be the big three. I like citrulline malate, bonded citrulline malate. You can only get it from Smart Powder / Prima Force / Slivation. It's the same owner. I'm a big fan of that, but it's fairly expensive. The research isn't as nice as I would like it to be, so it's more something to play with.
Yeah.
Although something worth mentioning with citrulline malate is, forget about the performance-related questions. If you or whoever watching this is a person that suffers from really bad soreness from exercise, citrulline malate makes an enormous difference. And that in and of itself might be enough of a reason to use it if someone has that money. Then I like playing with things like acetyl-L-tyrosine, which you can combine with caffeine, which is actually a really great study aid. Combine a moderate dose of caffeine with a pretty large dose of NAT, and it's a sort of a preferable alternative to something like Adderall. I actually had a friend of mine say that he used some Totalis as the pre-workout supplement I formulated. He used it before studying, and he said it was the best study aid ever. So people can look at those sort of ingredients and do that. I'm trying to think of what else. That would probably be the end of the list. Testosterone boosters are a prime example of something that I'm not going to recommend. Or special forms of creatine, given that there's nothing that stands up to creatine monohydrate, and all the other forms are more expensive.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Very cool.
The good supplements are the inexpensive ones. Look for things that are inexpensive and have research behind them. And it's a short list.
Yeah.
So.
All right. It's going to head over to some reader questions now. It's got a couple of them. Actually, there's 3. First one's from Kyle. What are your thoughts on carb cycling?
Carbs. It's used almost always as a cutting technique.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it necessarily gives someone an advantage over a straight carb intake or straight carb intake with some refeeds. I think it tends to overcomplicate things. This is, of course, an extraordinary tendency among bodybuilders, given the extreme nature of the sort of psychology you get. You know, you don't just do bodybuilding, you go all out and make your life bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of just creating an energy deficit, consuming an appropriate amount of protein, carbs, and fat, and just doing that, well, that's too simple. You have to make it much more complicated than that and do these crazy things with carbs. So again, I'm very skeptical as to whether or not someone that does carb cycling is going to have different results at the end of the day than someone who just takes an average of all of those numbers and does it over a week. Although there may be some logic behind varying carb intake based on whether or not you're training, what it is you're training. That's something I would do. That's something I would think about when cutting, because the total amount of carbs you consume is always going to be limited.
Mm-hmm.
Even if someone can cut eating 500 grams of carbs per day, that will be a limited amount for that person.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to shift some of your carbs around so that if you train in the morning, you're going to do legs. Maybe that means you want to shift a lot of your carbs the day before to right before you go to bed. Mm-hmm. These things really do make a difference in terms of performance. But that's about it, actually. Yeah. Other than that, I think it's a bit of an overrated technique.
Yeah, I think I tried it myself back in 2003, and it kind of complicated the whole cutting experience for me. I mean, now, if I was going to cut it, would be just a matter of, on the days I don't train, I'll just eat less carbs, and it's kind of almost an intuitive thing. You know, you just don't need as much fuel in the tank, right?
It also depends on what people mean by cycling. Wow. Excuse me.
Yeah.
That was what we call a Freudian slit. Depends on what someone means by carb cycling. I've met people that don't actually track their macros. They just have some days they eat carbs, and then a couple of days a week they just take all the carbs out of their diet. I suppose if someone wants to get reasonably lean and doesn't want to track macros, that might work. But that kind of approach to me is, I'll just say lazy. Yeah. Because tracking macros is not as excruciating as it's made out to be. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that hearing someone complain about having to track macros, just please. How many tens of thousands of children in the world just in this past day under the age of 5 died of just diarrhea, and we're complaining about spending 5 minutes tracking macros.
Yeah.
So I have no sympathy for that.
So this question's from Greg. He's we touched on this briefly before, but it'd be great if you could elaborate now. What are your thoughts on optimal protein intake in regards to bulking, cutting, and maintenance?
Right. I have always felt intuitively that protein is rather overrated by the bulk of people in this industry. Now, that in and of itself obviously isn't any kind of scientific view, but I think that the research tends to vindicate it. A gentleman, I believe by the name of Hasselhoff, wrote an article a couple months ago reviewing essentially all of the protein research there is, coming to the conclusion that even if one accounts for 2 standard deviations in the protein needs, the number you come up with is as low as 0.82 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. And he has said quite vigorously that the 1 gram per pound number is almost certainly too high, we've always said, sort of, I say we, large numbers of people have always said, okay, 1 gram per pound, sort of a good, safe, kind of a minimal number. Shoot for that, maybe a bit above. And he says, no, that's actually, for almost everyone, that's in fact excessive. And that you can go lower, and then there are a certain number of people that can go even lower than that. So of course, again, that I'm sure we had to have mentioned this a few times already, but that would be a starting point. And if someone is older, they're likely going to need more. They're going to be just total, purely genetic variations in protein needs and things like this. Good arguments can be made for increasing protein versus body weight when cutting for the sake of trying to spare muscle, although there are similar arguments that can be given for keeping protein fairly low so you can keep enough carbs in your diet, and also fat, given the purposes they serve. Maybe keeping more carbs in your diet means that your performance in the gym is better, which would ultimately mean better muscle retention than lower carbs and higher protein. Or maybe you want to keep protein a little lower so you can keep enough fat in your diet so that your energy levels don't go to shit because of hormones. These are things that have to be played with. But I do think the broad general recommendations regarding protein intake are almost always too high.
Okay.
Yeah, that's we already mentioned the 1 to 1.5 gram per pound recommendation that almost every magazine gives now is
selling product.
Well, yeah, that's a large part of it.
Yeah. All right. So it kind of wraps up the reader questions, and I kind of got one final one for you. What's next? What's next on the horizon for you?
Well, if one wants to make God laugh, one should make plans. Now that doesn't particularly mean anything to me, given that I don't hold to the relevant beliefs, but the spirit or the sentiment of that saying always strikes me. I do the best I can day to day, and I of course one has to have some concept of what one is going to be doing in 2 weeks or a month or a year, whatever it may be, but I don't think I've really seriously thought much farther forward than a couple of years. Of course, one can say, I hope in 20 years that, whatever it may be, I have 2 children and am a millionaire. But in terms of really specific things, I keep it closer to where I am now.
Right.
I think it may have been the Dalai Lama who has said this, but I don't recall exactly, and I'm sure I'm butchering the quote to death, but it's something like, the problem with the West is that we fixate on the past in that we regret it constantly and think about ways in which we could have done it better. And we constantly either fear or look forward to the future. We fear bad things that may happen, or we hope that good things do happen in the future. And we totally miss the present moment. So I try to avoid the two gutters that I've described and stay where I am now. So anyway, I'm obviously a philosophy major, and the mush-headed view comes through occasionally.
Sure.
But obviously, I want my YouTube presence to increase, and I hope that things like the debate with Dave happen again.
Yeah.
I've been invited. It looks like I'm going to be having some kind of discussion or debate with Dave Palumbo on his radio show.
Yeah.
Things like that. I'm going to be at the Arnold this year with Smart Powders, trolling around, starting shit. You know how I am.
Yeah.
Hopefully not getting beaten up by any thugs or anything.
Right.
So I'm having a bit of fun in
Sure.
the process. Hopefully.
You're building some mass now, so they won't mess with you. You'll be right.
No, I don't even lift. I just
Clearly.
I just eat crate loads of Pop-Tarts and whatever else it is that they say about me.
Yeah. All right. Well, it kind of wraps it up. So
I don't sacrifice to win, in other words.
Right. That wraps up the interview. So I'd like to thank you for taking part, and I appreciate your time. I appreciate that ungodly hour over there in the States.
Well, I have the crate of questionable substances over here that you sent me. Oh wait, I mean, thank you so much for the.
There's no endorsements. There's nothing you've heard here is endorsed. So don't forget to subscribe to the Crude Fitness channel and leave your questions and comments below.
Yes.
And you can also check out Ian via his YouTube channel, obviously, and follow him via Facebook. So, yeah, thanks again. It's been awesome.
Stay safe.